in my view, there's no scenario where the ANC will sit at 50% or more. Because what matters, Sizwe, for leadership is what happens when you are gone. The ANC, since the mid-90s, has been at war with itself. Pioneering work gets ridiculed because you are pushing the envelope.
Enjoy a wide range of views on this channel. Spread the fire.
Spread the fire.
Spread the fire.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Dr. Ongama Mtimka, who is joining us for the second time on this channel, has been a long-time supporter of the channel. And we had a big first episode, Dr. Mtimka. So welcome back by popular demand.
Thank you, Dr. Mpofu-Walsh. It's quite good to be back in this platform. It's become really a platform to be on. Congratulations to you and your team for that.
Thank you.
Looking at the ratings and everything, the viewership and all of that, and the conversation that it generates. So yeah, really keep it up.
Appreciate that. We're going to have an interesting conversation today about what's happening electorally 2024, looking forward to that year, and then the government that could be formed, and then get deeper into questions of leadership and what it means. So I can't wait for this full conversation, and especially the end where you meditate on, questions of leadership. But let's start at the shiny question of the 2024 election. What's your current thinking? You came on the show in the first episode that we did together, and you said you're pretty sure ANC is going below 50. I don't know if you saw or you mentioned that you saw the episode with Lukhona Mnguni, another one of our great analysts, who said if the election was held today, which was in November 2023, he thinks the ANC would hang on to 50. What's your current reading ahead of the 2024 election as we sit right now towards the end of 2023, beginning of 2024?
In much of my thinking about 2024, I haven't had a scenario where the ANC sits at about 50%. The reason being, I think the party politically has suffered a lot. The biggest driver of loss of support for the ANC has been, for now over nearly 20 years, a cannibalization of the brand by its own splinter parties that have come from it. I listened to Lukhona describe in really amazing terms the footprint of the ANC in terms of boots on the ground. The assumption that we should not make is the idea that that's a coherent force that can mobilize for the ANC.
Sure.
It's not a coherent force. A lot of the people are lured by other alternatives. To the left of the ANC, you find the economic freedom fighters. To the right of the ANC, you've got the new kids on the block. And I think that the one thing that campaign craft cannot do is to be so convincing that people's lived experiences do not become a factor when people are on the ballot box and are voting. If you drive to these small towns and some of the medium-sized towns like Komani, you drive and there are no street signs. Like you don't know, am I in a four-way stop? Am I in a priority crossroads? Or whatever the case may be. And also the quality of water. The ANC did a great role of massifying access to municipal services to such an extent that by the late 2000s, access to service connections had become great, both in terms of old residential areas and new residential areas. Unfortunately, where liberation dividends and the evidence of that delivered carried the ANC, it has become now about the collapse of the party brand, plus the lived experiences of people with those very same services they were connected to, the decline in the quality of water, among other things, that are going to be difficult to resolve by campaign craft. So, in my view, there's no scenario where the ANC will sit at 50% or more. And I have said also, though, that there's no scenario where they will be significantly in the lower 40s or early or late 30s, as some of the polls suggested. So there was something in the past few days where there were concerns or questions whether Zuma's snubbing of ANC efforts in KZN hinted to him likely going to campaign with another party, for another party. And that made me say, how certain am I about this below, how low down below 40, below 50, the ANC will go? Because you see a dynamic like that, Zuma campaigning for another party. I mean, that's significant.
What do you think is significant about that, and why do you think that could change things more than what we've already seen? Because we've also seen people like Mavuso Msimang. It's interesting because they're almost on opposite wings of the ANC. Yes. And what's interesting is you have people from both wings of the party withdrawing their support in some ways, or not being as vocal about their support. So it means that the veterans on the one side who have been critical of the Zuma years, let's say, and veterans from within the Zuma years are both at the same time withdrawing their support from the party.
So maybe let me start with the pro-Zuma approach. We, as the middle class, or the people who've been able to make ends meet in a democratic South Africa, would hardly, I see there's a lot of them, this is so an overly simplistic approach.
Sure.
But in general, I have seen a lot of people who take exception to the Zuma era, including myself, on the basis of how it threatened to collapse how things are done, including decency for example, if you're going to get something, get it from qualifications. And those of us who've been able to get qualifications are comfortable with that. If you look at the narrative that is said, Zuma created more millionaires than other people. Okay, that I often get tempted to believe how true it is, and I'll tell you how. And I think that the part of it may have been what President Zuma was consciously driving, or what he represented, what he embodied. But there was a thing of, yes, we've been driven by those who qualify for things. Even with Black economic empowerment and affirmative action, you could get a job as long as you had the qualifications. But there was a time in the period that Zuma was president where it was like, to hell with that. We're going to put people in, right? Some of them did have qualifications, some did not. That culture did actually create space for a lot of people who for whom the system didn't work before. Or people who were compromised or were not seen as the ideal types from a leadership point of view. I mean, look at, for example, the resolution in Polokwane of the anti-two centers of power thinking. Part of what influenced that was a view by some within the ANC that to allow an idea that the chairperson of the party in a province may not be the ideal candidate to be the leader as premier was influenced by qualification type thinking. And so the attack on that was meant to say, if you are the president or the chair, the provincial chair, automatically you become the provincial leader. And that actually takes away the importance of qualifications. In the politics of the ANC, that's coming back, and criteria is being prescribed again in new ways, where now the criteria is put as part of qualifying for office of the party. But for the longest period since Polokwane, the qualifying criteria did not affect the party, and in fact, I argue even the states. Now, the point I'm making is that that environment created space for people who felt that they would otherwise not qualify. And I mean, look at it, the ruptions that were there in the period of the selection of mayoral candidates, among other things. So it's the support base then, in my view, of President Zuma has got an army of people who benefit from a redetermination of what is the qualifying criteria to assume office, whether at a party or state level. And there's a mass base as well in that.
And I wanted to also say that because I think your point about the cadreship around Zuma and that grouping within the ANC is really important. But also, I think we can't undermine. Well, we'll see how it translates electorally, but there are a lot of people who just like President Zuma, who just support him and see him as a persecuted figure. We can debate until the cows come home the appropriateness of that or not.
Sure.
But there's also that element to his support of people who watch, and I think there was a poll about kind of his popularity in KZN.
Yeah.
Which some people will never understand, but there's a certain popular support for Zuma, maybe waning, but it's still there. And that we can't forget how Zuma got KZN on side for the ANC in his period as well.
So that would have been my next point. So I start from the national. Yeah. And indeed, you're quite right. The ANC is aware of it from either factions. Yeah. That's why you've never had... that's why you've had, I mean, even President Cyril Ramaphosa's response to the release of President Zuma was one of, we are grateful as sort of passive observers of the process, because they know how important it is, how important he is. And that's why also there's been attempts to try and get him to be a part of the election machinery of the ANC in KZN.
Absolutely. And then what about the other side of the Mavhuso Simangs of this world? Because that dual abandonment, as it were, or two different sides of the party, because Mavhuso Msimang was very critical of Zuma, the Zuma era of corruption, of state capture. And again, he pens a letter resigning from the ANC. So I think for the first time, and I know people have said before, I wonder what your thoughts on this are, that, you know, people have always left the ANC. Malema left the ANC, it was a big thing. Lekota left the ANC at the time, it was a big thing. But when you get two figures of this magnitude, I don't think you can completely ignore it. What are your thoughts on that side of the party and Mavhuso Msimang and that ilk starting to leave?
Yeah, the same reason that political parties parade people joining them
with T-shirts that were given
exactly
5 minutes before.
So in marketing they would call it an endorsement strategy when you have big wigs or powerful people, you know, either give you a vote of confidence or no confidence. So the idea that this doesn't matter is just not, whether looked at from a business scientific perspective or in pure electoral politics, it matters. Now, two things about because remember, Dr. Msimang is an individual, but he also represents an idea. An idea of people who've been waiting for Rosa Ganele, you know, that the President Cyril Ramaphosa presidency is going to turn things around. Now, I think that from a governance point of view, the president has failed here. What I thought is an exercise I was going to do was going to look at what traction has been generated by all these structures that were created, the what are they called now? It's not commissions, the committees, and these groups that are in the office of the presidency.
Yeah, absolutely.
What has been their impact on the performances of the line departments?
Yeah, sure.
Because what matters, Sizwe, for leadership is what happens when you are gone, not while you are still in office. So the idea behind effective leadership is that you would have led departments to become better, and as they become better, you leave a legacy of performance which would outlast your term. When you create structures outside of the system, one, sustaining them is a problem because they are not in the organizational structure of how government. Now, their impact on the systemic becomes limited if they operate like an ivory tower, which would then say what little success has been achieved by way of projects. If it fails to culminate into changed behavior in the departments, then it's futile. It's an exercise in futility, which would then would say that from a leadership of the administration perspective, things have been that they haven't really worked. So as a result of that, Dr. Msimang represents a whole lot of other people who have been disappointed by failure to achieve a critical mass of support, of success, where it matters most in the administration. I wouldn't, though, say there hasn't been success at all.
Sure. What do you think of the successes?
Unfortunately, at the level of government, I mean, he's in a core making references to investment commitments made at an investment level. Okay. Now, I was in investment promotion before. Between announcement of an investment and it becoming a project that is job creating is a period. Sometimes per project, it can take on average 3 years. There's EIAs that need to be undertaken. Sometimes that can take 10 years. Okay, that's the world of investment promotion. So I'm happy to give at least the indication, the commitments that have been made. The auto sector has been retained. That's good. There's been bold commitments that have been made by the auto sector. Notwithstanding the around early December concerns about VW, but where I think that his successes have been at the level of the party. The ANC, since the mid-90s, has been at war with itself. Except that President Mbeki had it under control because he had a dominant faction that supported him. Then President Zuma in Polokwane, the counter faction left to form COPE and MASE and didn't remain as an internal voice of contestation, to such an extent that when a threat against his rule within the party emerged in that NUMSA EFF, NUMSA Youth League nexus, he was able to politically deal with it at the Mangaung conference, and then leading up to Nasrec 1, it had the momentum had been gained by a counter faction. Okay, so
the RET faction.
I guess for him the RET was pro-Zuma, leading to the radical socio-economic transformation. So that faction had become bold, but it was a splinter of the RET faction leading to Mangaung. So in that sense, then the war with itself, it starts 2 years after Mangaung. Okay. But with President Ramaphosa, the war is declared immediately. 5 years is too short. And he doesn't have a Gwedemantashe like Zuma did in Mangaung. So from Polokwane, in fact, and then Mangaung. He doesn't have a Gwedemantashe. So must contend with a secretariat that's anti the current president. he is able to win that battle in 2 years, right? Such that he goes to Nasrec 2 and is able to actually consolidate a base. So politically, he has what Zuma had coming out of Polokwane. He currently has that. Sadly, this has not been used to achieve successes at the level of the state.
And in some ways, just on that, I think when he came into office, on an unprecedented wave of goodwill and optimism, he had a choice as to whether he would stabilize the party and then try to use that to stabilize the state, or just take some very decisive state decisions and maybe the party would suffer.
Love it.
And he chose the party, in my view. I heard someone in the ANC yesterday say to me, it's funny because the people in the ANC think he chose the state over the party, and people in the country think he chose the party over the state.
Sizwe, I love it. I wrote a piece saying he needed to do this.
Yeah.
Saying that all he needed to do is to accept that he's going to have one term.
I fully agree. He should have said, I'm a one-term president. I'm going to do bold things.
At the level of the state.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're quite right. When you do that, you choose the state, you trigger the necessary political processes to remove you.
Yeah, sure.
But you accept that. That's part of the budgeting. If you look at throughout history, all great leaders, that's what they do.
And the people would have come in to save him from the party, actually. If he did really bold things and the ANC said, we're removing you, the people would have said, no, you're not.
Indeed. I guess in indirect ways, in the sense that maybe popularity and all of those things. But he could have, if he had done that, more people who are pro him in the party might have been galvanized to be anti, right?
Sure.
So, but what does a true statesman positioned as the next Nelson Mandela do when faced with a choice of doing what's good for the country and then face a revolt internally? A true statesman, in my view, chooses to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
And then accepts that even if I am not failed. So I'm qualifying what you were adding to say, even at the prospect of not being supported by the country, he should have been bold to say, single-mindedly, I'm going to pursue this because it's good for the country. Yes, by the time a coalition of the wounded from the state gathered and went into Nasrec 2, he would have had so much momentum at the level of government that when you go to that election in 2024, his gravitas, not supporting what would have been done and betrayal, whatever the case may be, would help to do what South Africans are going to do anyway next year, to vote for a new reality.
Yeah, absolutely. He would have become indispensable politically, and the ANC would have had to choose: do we get rid of this very popular president, or do we keep him? And they would have had a very difficult choice.
And by the way, even if they decided to kick him out of the fact that he would have been victimizing a lot more senior politicians, it wouldn't matter. Because in a political system, I'm a systems theorist, or let me say I'm a fan of systems theory. The whole is greater than the constitutive parts. The ANC, you would have had a faction that is dominant in the ANC, that is resisting building a rule of law order at the level of the state, or a credible, capable state. But that cohort would not be so significant like the ANC of the dominant party days would have been come election and post-election next year. So the greatest benefit that should have come is the one that would have come from decisive leadership at the level of the state.
Absolutely.
Now, by the way, I also make an argument that the last dance, as it were, of the president could again be to say, let me not come back for a second time at the level of the state. I've been emboldened at the level of the party,
Yeah.
and I can continue until 2027. Let me champion and pioneer the remaking of not just the ANC, but the politics and the feel of the politics of South Africa by a radical modernization path.
Sure.
What that radical modernization path could be is to leverage what the Electoral Committee of the ANC has started to do, prescribing quality of leadership. And for me, as a matter of necessity, anyone whose name, one way or another, has brought the party into disrepute, defined more broadly in line with Rule 25 of the ANC Constitution, should not come back for a second term, should not be in the party list, and should not come back for office. And that starts with the president himself.
That's the problem.
You know what I mean? And again, a statesman, styled after Nelson Mandela, should do this with ease. There should be a saying that says, guys, I'm going to lead the pack.
Yeah.
I'm not going in there. There's no way we're going to have our deputy go in there. There's no way we're going to have either Gwede Mantashe, even a Pravin. I mean, there's no mass scandal that Prime Minister Pravin Gordhan is known for, at least that I can remember. Okay, that's credible. But we're tired of their politics. I am tired of their politics.
Yeah.
And I think that they can do something amazing for the country by saying, none of us are going back. Let's offer an ANC of the future. And that, in my view, by the way, won't save the ANC for 24.
Sure.
But would set the ANC for a comeback in either 29, 34, or 39. And you do that when you're a long-range leader with foresight. If you look at the return of the Malawi Democratic Congress, I think, it took them some time, but they were able to come back into leadership. Okay,
absolutely.
So sometimes it's a question of how strategically and technically do you manage a downfall such that you would be able to position yourself for resurrection. Not how to avoid the downfall at all costs.
Absolutely. I say this often to the people within the ANC that I speak to, that losing power, I don't know if it's going to happen or not, could be the best thing that has ever happened to the ANC. There's a scenario in which losing power firstly shocks the ANC out of its complacency, because I think right now what I see when I speak to ANC leaders and ministers on this platform and the SABC platform, there's still that sense of complacency that power gives you, that the only way out of that is losing that power and really looking hard in the mirror. And I don't think the ANC has ever had to really look hard. Yes, they choreograph we've looked hard, and they say we've looked hard. I don't think they really have looked hard. And that moment of how do we rebuild this from where we are? Because the ANC's proposition is the right one for South Africa at its best. It's social democratic, it's pro the poor black majority, it's good governance, it's overcoming apartheid. Can the ANC go back out of power? Not worry about the theatrics of coalitions and opposition. Let them govern and re-find itself and come back with a strong proposition around 2029.
If you are at the age of looking after grandchildren and thinking of reflecting about your life and maybe preparing for death in the next 20, 30 years, God forbid, how much critical reflection with a view to build for long term you can do is interesting for me in terms of the will to do it. Just on a psychoanalytical
Sure.
perspective of somebody
Sure.
who is at that level. I've been warned before that, look, the ANC may be like this at a national level, but if you go to municipalities,
Yeah.
we have a problem of young people off the party
Sure.
that are running amok, that do not have a sense of patience, and I often say in response, obviously, when some of us are pushing for generational shift, we are not by the same tokens pushing an ageist agenda.
Yeah, sure.
We are saying competent, proven, experienced young people who can build things and do things.
Yeah.
It's no child's play to do what you do. To master the emotions of how to build a business, how to build a platform,
Sure.
how to grow, how to market it. This is no child's play. You are learning experiences and then balancing family.
Sure.
This is part of the necessary leadership development track for people to go on to do greater things in life. What does the ANC do? Were you the loudest in SASCO? Yes, there's some organization building work that happens there, but you get parachuted from there to becoming an MMC. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who prove themselves in various sectors of society, in true form, by the way, to the NDR and the motive forces. Okay, people who have proven themselves elsewhere who come in. Sorry, I've spoken a lot. I forgot what your question was.
No, exactly. Yeah. No, I think the point is the right one, just about, the party resurrecting itself and finding a new...
Sure.
I want to move away from the ANC and come to opposition politics in general. Because I think you've said a lot, and I think if the ANC followed your message, they could have an interesting message for 2024. But let's not give them too many ideas.
Sure.
Opposition politics is interesting at the moment, and I want to come to the multi-party charter plus new entrants, because there's also been this interesting development with the multi-party charter, which had, I think, just started the last time we spoke, and how that has developed. And then we've got this Roger Jardine all of a sudden starting something new. Is he going to be the face of the multi-party charter? Is he not? And then Rise Mzansi, which is an interesting proposition, I keep saying, in my mind. They've got a lot of work, though, to do as well. But then Roger Jardine, Rise Mzansi, they seem a similar idea. So now are we fracturing that third way? Even the third way is now factionalized. So talk to me about your thoughts on opposition politics going into 2024 and what we can look forward to in this important year coming up.
Sure. So the dominant opposition players in South Africa, or main players.
And just to say, we will come to the EFF for those in the comments who say, "Oh, you're not going to touch on the EFF."
Sure.
We're coming there.
Sure. Yeah. So two things. So the dominant players in the political spectrum in South Africa have been a battle of the emerging haves, but generally have-nots in terms of the constituencies, and the haves. The haves have been in the opposition, main opposition.
Sure.
And doing all in their power to try and block how deep a project of transformation can go. Under a very false idea, in my view, of what it means to create an inclusive society, politically and economically in South Africa. I think you and Pedro go in detail talking about that in higher education, but in broad terms, coloniality and settler colonialism.
Sure.
So whether it is negating Black economic empowerment, whether it is negating employment equity and all of those things, what I found was that the DA had created this thing of a misleading of even its own constituency, by the way. Because, Sizwe, if you live in South Africa And by the way, if you live in South Africa, and South Africa has undergone a process of white economic empowerment that was brutal, violent, and genocidal.
Yeah, for 300 years plus.
As a representative of the political constituency that was responsible for that, you should be pro ways of creating an inclusive society, not on the opposite of it.
Absolutely.
So for the longest part, that created a dynamic of opposition politics that was racial in South Africa, where the opposition to the ANC was an agenda that cannot escape racist resistance to transformation and inclusion. That created a problem for the majority of Black people, who, by the way, are being undermined by many DA and AfriForum politicians as unthinking, when in fact they were thinking. So the ANC voter, there hasn't been a time when it was not thinking. The ANC voter has been trapped in a situation where if I vote for somebody that is anti-affirmative action, that is anti-Black economic empowerment, that is anti-redress, what am I doing? So this has been the problem with our politics. I am happy, though, that the DA is, by the way, the DA had its own trajectory of becoming broad church, representing more than just the haves that wanted to resist transformation. And guess who was the pioneer of that? Helen Zille. Helen Zille was the pioneer of a process of transforming the DA, but her exercise was a cosmetic one. She thought that she could attract to the DA leaders who would be comfortable with its policy. And I always argued that she's thinking that you could have Black people who buy into the liberal politics of no interference, or what we call negative freedom. The freedom of, as long as there's no rules that prevent people from achieving what they can, then it's fine. It was never going to be. I mean, I remember Musi saying, if you don't see that I am Black, you probably don't see me at all. And then his faction winning to some degree to include diversity in its in the core values of the DA. I mean, but watered down, if you remember the politics in around April 2018 of how best to include diversity in the offering, in the core offering of the DA. Now, I've said all of that to say, what excites me about the new and the emerging political space is that on the opposition of the ANC, you are no longer having as a very strong voice a grouping that is about just mainly about resisting creating an inclusive society or resisting doing the necessary from a policy perspective to have an inclusive society. And so what I'm seeing is that there is a creation of alternatives for the majority voter base in South Africa. That's no longer, if you don't vote ANC, you are elevating the political platforms of those who control the means of production, or the political platform of those who control most of business in South Africa. Now you have emerging from within the ANC, the EFF, which you said we're going to talk about, but also centrist politics that comes both from the DA and the ANC. Some of it, I mean, Herman Mashaba, I think in many ways subscribes to DA proper politics, but I would say left of the proper DA. Musi Maimane, Songa Zozibi, and them, in my view, they present this mix of leaders who are not necessarily about defending the haves. Notwithstanding some of the decampaigning on social media that says, anyway, they are projects of big business. Okay, this is the argument. Funded by big business. I used to be in fundraising before. And in fundraising, we used to say, we separate between the objectives of the funder and our objective as a beneficiary organization. We are passionate about what we do. as an organization. The funder may have different interests when they fund us, but ours is to make sure that our reason for existence is realized, and we leverage their funding. So I'm not a purist when it comes to the relationship between funding and the object or the content of what a political party can go on to succeed. Putin showed the billionaires in Russia that you may be a driver behind me getting into office, but I will not think twice about reestablishing. I mean, Putin, in all the critique that he's got, in Russia, he represented the establishment of an orderly process of new methods of accumulation, if you like, and fundamentally departed from the Boris Yeltsin chaos that was there. It's still an agenda which in the West would be described as corrupt, but he brought order and authority, and so what I'm saying is that it doesn't necessarily follow that if you are if big business has got an influence in your rise,
that they control your every policy move.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the multi-party charter, I don't know, how would you say it's fared? I mean, on the one hand, it's become part of everyday political conversation. It hasn't completely broken apart yet, or at all. But there seems to be some. So, firstly, we've got things happening in municipalities, like Joburg, where clearly there's not coordination. And then you've got, as I say, this suggestion that Roger Jardine, at the time of recording, it's not clear, but could be a presidential candidate. So the question of leadership of the multi-party charter has continued to confound, it seems, the charter. So we're not sure who's going to lead this thing into the election, who's the candidate around which they're going to be rallying, even though we don't have a presidential system. And are they going to try and import a candidate from outside? Interesting move, because they then say, look, none of us will be the candidate. We want this external candidate. But then can you imagine convincing all those political parties that someone else must lead? Yeah.
I love the idea of how suddenly leadership got to be contested in that platform.
Sure.
Not for its sake, but as a political analyst and scientist, it's interesting for me. Yeah. Remember that the major player in the charter has been the Democratic Alliance. And for the longest part, leadership in the Democratic Alliance has been an outcome of elite maneuvering. Believe it or not, I mean, they may deny it, but the role of the elite in determining leadership outcomes in the DA, notwithstanding the democratic process of elections, at the Congress of the party. So they've been a party where an inner core can call the shots as to who comes and who goes.
Sure.
Spanner in the works, right, is that the all of a sudden the considerations have got to be the public gaze and the prospective voter.
Yeah.
Which then introduces a dynamic which, by the way, in my view, had been the dynamic that had gotten Helen Zille to be thinking about how to get a Lindiwe Mazibuko leading in parliament, how to get a Musimaimane as the leader. Yeah. So those considerations were showing, this dynamic of living systems, that they are self-determinant and interdependent, that you have your own way of deciding things, but you cannot ignore there is the systemic response, and therefore you act in ways to show how you are wanting to charm the rest of the system. I think that's what's happening in the multi-party charter. That one, the candidate is emerging from the two perspectives, in my view. Some association with struggle, and also this idea of who can have more gravitas.
Yeah.
But the very idea that the DA thinks its leader doesn't have gravitas, or in fact, the coalition partners do not. And it was interesting. It was interesting to hear social media commentators say, well, they let Mmusi Maimane go, and now they realize that in fact you cannot go to the election. And it's interesting how South Africans are decampaigning. I know that's not a word, by the way, but I mean, for effect, decampaigning John Steenhuisen. And this thing about qualifications being at the center of it. It's interesting for me. It's quite interesting. How the group navigates this is interesting. But you're quite right also. The group is not being judged on the basis of what they're promising, but what they're failing to do now together. So the thing about what are you doing with existing coalitions and the effect that has on the relationships first among the parties is interesting, and it's going to continue to be so because unlike other countries where, there's a harmonized system where it's not all of government that goes to an election. But so municipalities are going to continuously be a source from which ructions in the relationship in the multi-party charter may emerge continuously. I mean, it's interesting for me. I know it's not answers that I'm providing directly, but this is the frame of thought, the frame of issues that I'm thinking about in relation to the charter. The other thing, though, that they need to worry about is not to become extended DA. Because if it does, then other parties will remain strategically correct in not joining it before elections.
Sure.
Such as Rise, SA, among others. I don't know whether eventually they became part of it.
No, they haven't yet.
You see, so that is a strategic choice that must be, and Busa, I don't think they are also.
Yeah, true.
That, in my view, they must maintain that because post-election, this thing is going to be open anyway. To have themselves embroiled in a DA-dominated thing where that politics of defense against transformation and inclusiveness will still be a key issue. I don't think it's wise.
Doc, let's come to the EFF as well. Polls are suggesting a decent amount of growth. The average right now is 15% from their 10. At the same time, no one has really risen to claim that mantle of an opposition party that could really rise to challenge the ANC. The EFF has been going for 10 years now. In some ways a short time in politics, in other ways a long time in politics. And yes, they may rise to a higher level, but there are still some who are also on the fence about just not being able to give their full support to the EFF. I think sometimes the EFF can get it really right or really wrong. The Springbok thing, for example, I just thought was a moment where they just got it wrong, Where do you see them at the moment? And just one other piece of context to add. The ANC is going to have a choice, basically, at the end of this election. It's either going to be small parties, which they'll go for if they have the majority. Otherwise, it's the DA or the EFF. We spoke to the ANC Youth League leader on this channel recently, and he said, we're ideologically aligned to the EFF, but they're unreliable. And we don't want to wake up one day and the EFF has changed its tune, and now we're caught in the crossfire. But the DA, we're not ideologically aligned to, but we think we could have a stable partnership. So I'll leave that for you to dissect.
Sure. Oh, thanks a lot. So maybe let's start with the economic freedom fighters. I've been positive about their growth for every election, before elections, notwithstanding, pollsters. And in fact, I've been very bold in my judgmental approach, using the judgmental method from election to election in order to project.
Sure.
The EFF, in my view, was the only party among the existing ones that were going to see a net growth from these elections. And the reason for that is that they are representing a constituency without necessarily having been in government and failed on some of their promises. But also, they were tactical. In fact, I wrote a piece in 2016 after the coalitions were formed that this tactical thing of not going into government but lending support to remove the ANC in some municipalities was an interesting gambit that was guaranteed to keep the EFF in the mind of voters as a prospective party that can come in and make change without being in government and actually confirm whether or not they can. And I think that they're still going to grow as a result of that. The guys are smart when it comes to, their messaging. However, sometimes go into what I call divisive politics, which push them to be on the extreme along with the Freedom Front Plus, but on opposite sides. And in fact, some people have actually called them fascist for some of their rhetoric. I think that they get to be too radical at times. And also, you see, we have a lot to offer to the world, especially if you look at the Middle East crisis in South Africa, in the sense that we have the thorny issues of our lives have been allowed to be negotiated to settle at some central point. As crude and as uncomfortable when you look at them in terms of what they are, as countries in civil war throughout the continent, or in fact in the Middle East, as I say. So how we've been able to negotiate thorny issues as a country, one may argue that actually took over 380 to close to 400 years. So you can understand how we are here. But sometimes, in my view, without the necessary political ability to do what is promised, sometimes the EFF rocks the boat for the sake of rocking the boat, and in fact ends up alienating a lot of people who are in the center. Look at how they are battling in KZN and the Eastern Cape, in conservative societies.
Sure.
If I can put it that way. In very conservative societies, a conservative from the perspective of rules of conduct in society. They're battling.
Sure.
The growth has been marginal. It's been significant, especially if you look into ANC strongholds. You see that what explains ANC loss of support is directly the existence of the EFF in the paper that Gary Prevost and I wrote.
Sure.
But it's not as exciting as they would like.
Sure.
Now, recently, I wondered whether they are toying with the idea of making a charm offensive to the leaders of the now obliterated RT faction.
Yeah, we spoke about that. Yeah.
Remember, the EFF appeals to people who want radical politics, with or without the RT.
Sure.
They built that platform without the RT. It's confusing for me when, for some reason, they think that they need to charm the RT for that support base, because that's not true. They charmed that support base, the radical support base, without the RT. So I make the argument in a piece that I've not yet finished, that in fact, what they presented to the black voter, the EFF, was one, radical politics, two, radical politics in a comfortable anti-corrupt pro-rule of law space, right? For the longest part, because it was them who were against the Zuma administration,
Sure. The
talking
Guptas
about the spies, the Guptas and stuff. So they represented to someone who may not be comfortable with the radical politics,
Yeah.
but they represented not the DA. You know, I can throw my vote here. When they consciously want to attract the leaders of the RT, I don't know if this is what they intend to do. So far, not.
Yeah.
Because those leaders have found different political avenues for themselves outside of the ANC.
There was talk of Ace Magashule at one point, I think, in our previous conversation, and we see that he actually did his own.
Yes, yes. So now they if they were intentionally pursuing that en masse, it's one thing to have one or two people come in, but if they went to pursue 3-4 of these leaders that were known, then you begin to cloud the message as not radical and pro-rule of law, as radical and in fact wanting an agenda that is not clean.
Sure.
They've got to navigate this carefully. I think that they're talking internally, because I've seen, you see, Julius Malema tends to be flippant sometimes, but I've seen him kind of reining himself in since the first, you're quite right, the first Ace Magashule discussions. Then I've seen him becoming a lot more careful. And if they play that well, they continue to be this platform that can attract growth. It won't be as as impressive as they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think to move to the formation of a government now, which is also linked to questions of leadership.
That was a latter question.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of focus in the 2024 election on the election and who's going to win, who's going to lose, who's going to fall below 50 or 20 or 10. And all of this is ultimately to create a government. It's to create a parliament, of course, that will create a government. And quite frankly, whoever that government is, whether it's an ANC-EFF coalition or a multi-party charter, we're not maybe giving enough attention to what that government needs to do and the kind of massive task that will be ahead of that government after this election is finished. Let's maybe start here. What do you think that new government, whoever it is, should prioritize, so that when they come back here and when the new president watches this episode, which I'm sure she or he will, how do we start setting the agenda for what that government's priorities should be?
Sure. That's quite interesting. So maybe we can distinguish them between three things. State building.
Sure.
Enabling or developmental state, which is related to the first, but what enabling role, or the role of the state in the economy, let me put it that way.
Yeah,
the second one.
Sure.
So it's state building, is the role of the state in the economy, and an inclusive society. Last one,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. And they're all interrelated, actually.
Yes. As far as state building, I don't know if I mentioned to you about my experience in South Sudan and what happens when you're trying to build the state and there is no civil service.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we in South Africa group together with all the other sunset clauses the idea that the administration needed to be left while the political processes were unfolding leading to 94 and after. We see it as a sunset clause, and we see it in a negative light. Right? Sure. Try and be in a country that, one, is new because it has just splintered from its northern counterpart. This is South Sudan versus Northern Sudan.
Yeah, or Sudan.
The second thing, Sudan.
Yeah.
The second thing is, then this country goes into a war. So whatever remnant of an administration you had, from the split gets to be obliterated by what a war does.
Yeah.
Then now you must start building after the conflict. When you want to employ leadership over the administration, you have to worry about what should be the organogram, what should be the job description.
Yeah, sure.
We didn't have to do that in South Africa. We had to manage about transforming what exists and not build from scratch. Indeed, in the homelands and all of those, you needed to again there to bring things.
Sure.
Obviously, it's good to start afresh, something that's your own.
No, absolutely.
Except that when you do, you are not going to perform as you start to do things.
Yeah.
So we were able to deliver in South Africa, leveraging an administrative apparatus that was inherited from apartheid.
Sure.
It was corrupt. I think Van Vieren makes the point that we think in South Africa that South Africa is a great country that was transforming, that under the ANC has become corrupt. And he makes the point that this has been corrupt since, and he traces about 574 billion from 74 to 94 that was lost through corruption, among other things. So yes, it was a corrupt administration, but you had warm bodies in offices and they were doing some work.
Sure.
And you simply had to transform it and replace and all of those things. Now, we had to do some state building next year.
Yeah.
And this thing of starting to build presidency-based structures may be good in the first 6 months. But that's not that's not how you build a government. You build a government by leading the complex administrative apparatus effectively.
Absolutely.
Through the channels of holding your minister and their DG accountable, who then hold them and their senior management accountable.
Yeah.
So there needs to be an unapologetic commitment to people who are fit for purpose. Starting from DGs to senior managers.
Yeah, and below DGs as well. Can I come in here? Because what you say is really, really interesting, and I've been thinking about it a lot, because I think this new government, yes, there will be massive challenges if it's a coalition and instability, but one window it opens up is exactly what you're saying, of rethinking what has come to be called cadre deployment, right? Whatever that really means. Now, to my mind, what has gone wrong with cadre deployment, or whatever we want to call that process, is not necessarily the ministerial appointments, right? Because as many people have pointed out, you do need a political direction at the top of a political institution, which is what a minister should ultimately doing.
Yes.
What I think the ANC has got wrong, so I don't have a problem with that in principle, especially at the top of government. But let's be honest, as a young, capable, qualified Black South African, my problem with cadre deployment is every level of government has to be an ANC-linked person, from literally entry level all the way up. And I feel like we need to fill those true state positions below minister, and DG maybe is a bit of a mixture of the two, so that any young or old, for that matter, person can get a job in government at the lower levels. Because that's what's undermined capacity for me.
And you know why it's necessary to do that in the logic of the ANC? Because then you can command the entire system.
Yeah, sure.
Not for purposes of achieving what is intended. Sorry, noble objectives.
Yeah, exactly.
But to achieve an agenda of repurposing what the departments are for, towards what is not desirable and not noble. So in cadre deployment, one of the lessons I got were from my first chief executive at Kucha, who is now the chief executive at TNPA, Pepe Silinga. He says to me, you know what? And I'm mentioning this because it was a product of a master's research project.
Interesting.
Creative politicking in post-apartheid South Africa. And in there, I am writing about how executives conduct business with excellence. Excellence meaning do what you are employed to do,
Yeah.
but mindful of the national imperatives.
Absolutely.
So I saw this live being done.
Yeah.
And he used to say two things. One, you must fear the power you have. So if you fear the power you have, you are going to create mechanisms which, when you are tempted, you will think, how do I start approaching Ongama to say he must do this? Because your recruitment system is designed to deliver the best, whether you know them or not.
Yeah, exactly.
So if your recruitment systems deliver the best, rather than the ones you have made, it's different how you interact with that administration. And this guy would create procurement committees.
Sure.
That he would have to think a lot to instruct that procurement.
Yeah.
I mean, here you have, to your point that you're making, you have people who can instruct an entire bid adjudication committee. I mean, can you imagine being a professional who is voting for the who's there not for you? And by the way, it's dehumanizing, because in my view, a human being thrives when they are given the space to express themselves. Not even God, if I can claim, if I can use that language, subscribes to the idea of violating the spirit and free will of a person. Now, so why it's animals that you direct, right? That's why I'm saying, when you make people and plant them in an administration, the way you were describing, you are dehumanizing them.
Sure.
One, because you are taking a sense of achievement for the roles, and two, you are taking which is supreme, their sovereignty, their ability to say, you are requesting this, I'm applying my mind, and I'm going to decide what I do with it. So when you do that, you dehumanize. By the way, this is why I know I'm digressing, Doc. This is why people who were beneficiaries of ANC deployment struggle making it in society after that experience.
Absolutely.
Why? Because that system tells them you are nothing without this power.
And they start to believe that.
Yes. Whereas you're not here because of...
if anything, I'm here because I speak out against...
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, you can be fired from everything that you do. You'll go somewhere else and you will succeed.
No, absolutely.
Because it's in you.
Absolutely.
You're expressing who you are.
And let's be honest, the road is very open for all of us, with qualifications and a public platform to say, actually, let me play the ANC game.
Indeed.
And we would.
Indeed.
It would be very lucrative, that much I know.
Indeed.
But no, I fully agree. And I think that would be the apex priority of any government, if you can get that right. And it even comes back to your point about the apartheid bureaucracy and the transition. There are many white South Africans who are committed to the country, want to take it forward, have the ability and the skills to do so, and are not interested in restricting transformation. And we have failed to bring them into the state in a way, meaningfully, which drives the entire country forward. We need to do something about the massive reservoir of skills, white and black, outside the state, that just can't find a way in, not at the top, even at the bottom or the middle of the state.
Yeah.
And just open that up to pure meritocratic, which also means an appreciation for the society and its diversity, a purely capable state where the best serve the objectives of the government.
Absolutely. And I think that's bringing me to that second leg of the role of the state, as well as the I forgot now, the conceptualization in terms of, creating an inclusive society.
Yeah, and the developmental was the second,
Indeed. So you're quite right. There are a lot of South Africans who care about this country, white and black. We need to give them space to do their job.
Yeah.
What is a problem is not just the government, but in my view, even the Democratic Alliance and AfriForum. who create a siege mentality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then push people to corners and in a defense mode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Apartheid didn't want a society where white, black leverage together what they have for the greater good. Because of this perception that there wasn't enough for everyone.
Yeah.
Because of this perception that black people were very welcoming to settlers coming in are not in fact are in fact barbaric. You know, this thing, that perception is dangerous. In my view, that politics of the DA that seeks to block transformation, that politics of the AfriForum, all serve the same agenda with the sometimes politics of the EFF of division. Group all of them together, they're a problem, in my view, sometimes. Because of this, as far as the politics of race management is concerned. Because it is they then who then push us into defensive and offensive mode, and there's no work you can do there. Where we need collaboration is mutual vulnerability. You cannot have collaboration and staunch protection at the same time. It doesn't happen. Wherever I have gone, I have been involved directly in the creation of my successor. That's what happens in a society of people who are secure in their hearts. You cannot have people who will be so committed to the cause that they themselves train their own successors, who they fear that they might replace them. But the reward system, whether you're looking at African values or the faith, the reward system is always not dependent on the games that humans play. There's a saying, for example, that nyawal nampumlo or isisu somahambi asingakanani. All of these are meant to say goodwill is important, and it has the system of life has a way of rewarding goodwill. Okay, so if people are going to be taking risks and sharing resources, sharing assets, sharing not in a way that is immediately causing them to lose. I'm talking about the kind of sharing that allows them to thrive immediately.
Absolutely.
So I'm writing a book. I just got my ethics clearance, Pathways to Inclusion. A Political Economy of South Africa in the 21st Century. Here, I'm wanting to say, let's move from the politics of inclusion to its economics.
Right.
And its economics, it's what's going to take South Africa to make South Africa to thrive.
Let's talk about that, because I think this is a good place to also move in terms of a new government, because that would be a crucial pillar. Is how do you get the economic trajectory on track, but also inclusive at the same time? So if you fix the state and you can fix the economy, then you've arrived at a heavenly place, right?
You have a thriving society. BKB is a company in the agricultural sector. How economies are structured, the sectors. From the hinterland, you extract resources, and then you sell at a higher price in global markets. BKB, in my view, and I'm mentioning them because I find their model something to be looked at as far as how you leverage your network.
No, it's great. We're always criticizing companies. Maybe now we can finally get one who will give us some money. So BKB, if you are interested in funding SMWX, here you go.
And it's so. I come from a rural area in Paddy. Just above KwaPikoli.
Okay, sisuke eQuqwana thina.
Yes.
Phakathi kwePedi neNqongqo.
Yes. So in that entire land, it's rural areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
What people do there is cattle, goat, and sheep. We don't plant as much as they do in
Yeah.
the Transkei, in the closer to in the former Transkei,
Yeah,
in the where my wife is from, for
Mm,
example, in the Mbizana area. There, I mean, the output per person in terms of maize is amazing.
Sure.
Okay, so we herd animals, and so what BKB does every shearing season for sheep, they go collect the wool, pay the people there, and go. My dad used to be so proud about what he makes during the times of. Now, the first thing is inclusion
Sure.
into a global value chain. South African wool is premium wool around the world. It's thriving, and here's a company that finds a way to do it to create inclusion.
Yeah. From things that are already being done.
Exactly, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
BE, the way BE is done is usually start up somebody who's going to
create
start
some new
something.
thing from thin air. Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas people who are working tirelessly,
People are working hard for nothing.
can be included in a value chain, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
the ripple effect of inclusion has economic outcomes that are good.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I'm wearing, okay, this person who makes what I'm wearing studied for it.
Sure.
But there are a lot of others who are brilliant designers. Maxhosa charges a premium from inspiration of who we are.
Keep going, Doc. More brand endorsements are coming in as you keep talking.
Mama Esther Mahlangu paints a BMW, and it becomes a global success. The thing
All the
about
music and the amapiano that's taking over the global music world right now.
our music,
Sure.
what is wrong about us saying we've got talent in South Africa? How do we nurture it?
Yeah.
How do we leverage it?
Yeah.
I once went to a holiday and I met this guy who says, I used to buy fashion for Edgar's and these other places. I keep mentioning this. Hey, okay.
No, hey, even better.
So I say to him, wow, I have an idea.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was still involved in small business support.
Sure.
I'm thinking, wow, if I can get this guy to bring these people who are operating in a market, it's a market. We call it informal.
Yeah.
Very, very, very cynical concept, because they make goods, and they have a system of making the goods and distributing them.
Sure.
We've had a lot of these people that are coming up. All they do is economies of scale.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, our own innovations can be flooding global markets and making us money. We have to leverage our culture. We have to leverage our sense of selves for ourselves in order for us to actually. So I'm pioneer. So masaya kuma panya panya ne. There's this thing about what Panyaza is doing with
sure,
panya panya.
Sure.
I sympathize with what he's doing because I was at Kucha when what you are trying to do, national legislation lags behind it.
Sure.
Because it's pioneering work. That's what happens with pioneering work. Pioneering work gets ridiculed because you are pushing the envelope. I was operating in the renewable energy space, mainly community development space, where we go to a community and say, if you want to do things here, you have to build local timber. You have to grow local timber. And if you're not going to do it, you are going to have a thing where the people here are beneficiaries of projects, but never a part of the process of delivering value. And as a result of that, when you leave, you're not going to leave a legacy of skills transfer and other things. So I would say, no, when you come here, it's going to take you longer to deliver. But to hell with the numbers. We delivered so many uniforms. No, tell me how many uniforms you delivered after you trained people who are based here, or after you empowered people who are still known to be designers who are based here. Can you not get them to make the uniform? And in that way, you are introducing mechanisms of operating at a higher level for people who operate with, and they know how to sow. They know how to do this, that, except that they don't have opportunity.
Sure.
So why are we concentrating opportunities in the center, wherever the center is? In fact, it's Joburg, Cape Town, and Durban. When you have skills that you could leverage to and when you do that, and it's proven, by the way, the rich do not become happier are not materially significantly happier than the poor. So the law of diminishing returns is, for every extra 10 rand that you give to a rich person, it doesn't add value really in an economy. But if you give it to a person who didn't have, the multiplier effect of that, and so you are dealing with, so you are bringing in a buying base that was not there before when you distribute. So I want to drive this idea that redistribution makes economic sense, but also inclusion in ways where I'm losing just a little bit of what I would have spent in another game of golf.
Sure.
To include another person for whom that 350 green fees is something, or that 550 green fees is something, and one less game for me per month, but something for them to. And we have to have an all of society approach to this, where I realize, or somebody who's at a university doing second year realizes they are even if they come from a poor family, but by virtue of the fact that they're at university doing second year, some science, whatever, they can teach at a high school. They can run a program where they are equipping young people with maths and science. You know how exorbitant the fees we pay for extra classes for our kids. When a person who is a university student gets to be supported to start extra classes, they earn a little bit of bucks. Or and you have an economy that leverages. Big word for me is leverage. Our skills, the skills of retirees, and the skills of white and black professionals that can be leveraged. In rugby, they are doing it.
True. That's the one thing that I think we can learn from the wider rugby ecosystem, but the success of the Springboks as well is we often fail to appreciate what we have got right and how we can replicate that in other places. And yes, of course, the legacy, the history, the racism, of course, is still there, but can that be replicated throughout an economy where everyone is working towards some common economic goal, leveraging all of their skills towards that, and everyone benefits in the end?
Yeah.
Transformation happens, redistribution happens, but everyone is working towards it, and no one is actively stopping it. When does the book come out, Doc? I'm mindful, firstly, that you have to go, and that we're running out of time. But when can we expect this book? And I think we can have a deeper conversation about pathways to economic inclusion, what that means in part 3.
Sure. So I'm glad there'll be a part 3.
Oh, there has to be. Yeah.
So it was supposed to come up mid next year if I had gotten my ethics clearance early.
Sure.
Ethics clearance because I wanted a research-based book where I talk to people in automotive.
Yeah.
They say what their problems are in terms of what limits their growth. I analyze the market, the sector.
Yeah.
And pinpoint exactly the ways in which bringing in other people is both making economic sense and also having developmental outcomes.
Yeah.
So I don't want to argue the point again about the politics of having to do that.
Sure, which we know, and it's
absolutely
settled in many ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's my contribution. I tweeted the other day that the economic freedom in our lifetime struggle, which is all of our struggles, cannot be fought in that dolo phezulu, left or right, nyamaza. This needs us to apply our minds
absolutely.
to things
find new models that maybe don't exist in any of the old frameworks.
And put them out there.
Yeah.
So
Find the South African economic model, which is not imported from anywhere else, which takes from the best of the different places, but also takes inspiration from our own context.
Yeah.
And then says to the world, this is a new economic model of inclusion, redistribution, and growth.
Absolutely. So probably late next year. I want to, because I think it's a matter of necessity.
Yeah.
I don't see myself as I'm adding to ongoing voices by you guys.
Sure.
So it's adding to an ongoing national conversation. Since I conceptualized this idea, I have seen. Wow, I was so happy when I saw The Tale of Two Agricultures. I haven't read it. Wandile Hlobo. So it's along the lines of I don't know what's in there, but the point is to look at some of those things. In agriculture, I'd been talking about a story of a friend of mine from Ngobo. Him and I used to be small business support, like writing business plans for entrepreneurs. He took that skill, went back home in Ngobo, and has got a massive agricultural enterprise. The guy's name is Yanga Dalasile. Maybe it would be good for you to have him one time. Sure. It's a massive project. And he leveraged communal gardens where like I think about 1,000, more than 3,000 hectares of land under have been plowed. So, and government came in. They partnered this thing of white and black. They partnered with the Koporasi. The Koporasi brought in its, the best multi-billion company experience to that, to a guy who has gone to school, has got a grasp of things, and could write and fundraise. Sure. So it's a relationship based on merit both ways. And it's benefiting a rural community. I think we need to do more of these. Definitely. We need to be aware of our advantage and start doing those things that help us contribute to society. I'm happy to say, this guy is a friend of mine, used to say, we've been made to be institutions. Sizwe is at SABC, he's running this platform. Sure. The colleagues who are working with you in this platform need you to run this platform the same way that the SABC staff need. And also, the academic ecosystem needs you. You know what I mean? Sure. So imagine the impact you are having in terms of creating jobs for other people by merely thriving in what you do. And the more of us do that, and another thing, by the way, that I'm exploring in this book is how to deal with underemployment. And in dealing with underemployment, create things. You wouldn't do this at Wits. Wits doesn't have space for you to do this. You know what I mean? Sure. It doesn't make sense for the university wants you to be in the classroom and teach and mark. So what do you do with the rest of your talent? You find ways to express it, and from it grows various offshoots. Sure. This may be a multimedia continental and global TV channel in years to come. And we will still be needing Sizwe that's an academic, Sizwe that's a media mogul, and Sizwe that, so how many of us, and this is your way of dealing with underemployment. I'm sure there are boards that are going to be calling on you to come and advise here and there. Sure. If more of us do that, we are then we've become what I'm calling rainmakers, because we are now leveraging what we know and what we're exposed to for other people. I guess this is what they missed in trickle-down economics, of how do you create social networks and socioeconomic networks that actually aid a system to trickle down, because it's not through an invisible hand. Sure. There has to be a hand that actually is intentional about how do we enable young black professionals to do more of this, that, and the other. How do we enable white professionals who are young? Those ones who have gone overseas, both black and white, they come back inevitably as investors. who gain new experience, gain new technology, and come back, and we must find ways in which we can help them to thrive.
Absolutely. Well, Doc, you've been very generous with your time. I think we'll definitely have to have you before the book comes out as well, to, especially in that time of the election, really think through what's happening, the formation of the government. So I'm hoping you'll be around at that time. And then when the book comes out, let's have a really in-depth conversation about that as well. But just to thank you so much for sharing your insights, your time. Congrats on all the things that you're doing. I know in the comments to our video, many people were just inspired by hearing your voice and hearing you at more length than sometimes the 5-10 minutes they see you on mainstream TV channels. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us again on SMWX. We really appreciated this interview.
Thank you for creating the platform, my brother. I hope that it becomes bigger than what Oscar or what's her name again? Why is he? Oh, why is it? Why am I forgetting it now? Oprah.
Oh my! Wow, that would be ideal.
Yeah, let it grow.
No,
Thank you.
I appreciate it, brother. Thank you. We appreciate you for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Let's take this channel to 100,000 subscribers. Show your love for Dr. Mtimka down in the comments. Follow him on all social media platforms. And stay tuned to SMWX. Aye.